Entramos en otro eje no menos importante cuando hablamos de alimentación, probablemente uno de los ejes más trascendentales, ¿no? Que tiene que ver con salud, ¿no? Y para ello realmente es un placer dar la bienvenida a nuestro siguiente ponente, que es alguien muy relevante en este campo, ¿no? Que es la salud y el bienestar. Teníamos una conversación el otro día acerca de la importancia de la alimentación en muchos ámbitos. Todos conocemos personas con trastornos alimentarios, todos conocemos personas con intolerancias, cada vez más aparecen este tipo de sucesos, ¿no? Entre cualquier usuario o cualquier persona del ámbito de la alimentación. En la siguiente ponencia vamos a entender muchas de las cosas que están pasando, como digo, con una ponente absolutamente de primer nivel. Hablamos de la doctora Mariela Glandt. Ella es endocrinóloga, educada en Harvard y Columbia, tiene una amplia experiencia, amplísima, diría yo, en el tratamiento de enfermedades metabólicas, especialmente diabetes y obesidad, que como sabéis es tristemente célebre. Es la fundadora y directora del Gian Center for Diabetes Care, que utiliza la dieta cetogénica como algo bastante revolucionario. Tiene una experiencia, digamos que amplia en Nueva York, en hospitales tan relevantes como el Mount Sinai, y ahora mismo está impulsando su propio proyecto del cual nos viene a hablar, que es Eatsane. So, Mariela, please, the floor is yours. Un fuerte aplauso para ella, por favor.
Gracias.
Perdón.
Okay. 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 Bueno, muchas gracias por esta invitación. I hope everybody is okay with the fact that I'm switching to English, which is much easier for me. um, Actually, I'm not talking about Eatsane today. I'm actually talking about what is a healthy diet. That was what I was told to speak about. So let me see. This is the clicker. Okay. So basically, my journey started 25 years ago, and I, like, as you heard, I studied in the US, very traditional schooling, and learned endocrinology. Have been treating diabetes for 20 years before I realized that, you know what, we don't know what we're doing. Diabetes is a disease caused by food, and the answer is in food. And so once I started delving in, I realized that I can actually get rid of this. I can actually cure this. I can actually make people healthy instead of giving them more and more medications. And so this is how I created the Glandt Center for Diabetes Care. And this is about half of the team. And we really have been getting so many amazing results. It's already about 3,000 patients that we have treated. So I'm very happy for the opportunity to share this with you. So mostly, I think when people go to the grocery store, they're extremely confused. They're like, what am I supposed to be buying? What is good for my family? What is good for me to be putting into my body? And there's a great deal of confusion about that. And actually, things have become very clear for me. But let me take you back on a little bit of a journey. So we have been getting farther and farther away from our animal state already for 10,000 years. But in the last 100 and so 100, 200 years since the Industrial Revolution, things have really progressed very quickly. And things have changed at a rate that's hard for us to, look at what's happening here. Like, I mean, I'm amazed, how far we are from our animal condition as we sit in this room. Now, what happened is that in 1961, the American Heart Association, for reasons that I can go into when I actually have more time, I will explain to you why the American Heart Association came out with a paper saying that we should be avoiding saturated fats. Now, this was not based on any study that made any sense. It was not any randomized controlled trial or something that you could trust. Based on this, things started to roll, and we started saying that fats clog our arteries. By 1977, the guidelines were published. First time in history that a government tells people what to eat, okay? So here we have a food pyramid. The base of the food pyramid is carbohydrates, and we're told to avoid fats, and especially saturated fats. If you're going to eat saturated fats, if you're going to eat a fat, it should be polyunsaturated fats, which as many of you may know, it's something that it was originally intended for machinery, but at the turn of the century, they saw that it could actually be fed to people. And so this has become now our main source of fat, which is very, very far from what our evolutionary history has shown us. So the two things, get rid of the fats and replace them with carbs, and a fat should be polyunsaturated. Now, the Americans actually follow these guidelines. This is N. Hayden's data. And they went to the gym more, they moved more, they ate less calories, they ate according to the food pyramid. They really do this. But it hasn't worked out so well for the Americans, nor for the rest of the world that has followed these guidelines. So this is the obesity rate in the United States. And you can see right around the turning point of the publication of the food pyramid that it had an effect. Now, I'm not saying cause or effect. I'm just showing a correlation here. Okay. So here you see an inflection point that's very significant. Now, this number is actually now more like 42, by the way, 42%. Now, the rest of the world is also following behind. This is not obesity. It's a different definition. This is just overweight. And you can see Spain is also going up. So let me just back up and talk to you a little bit about why this might be a correlation that we need to pay attention to. So we eat three types of foods. We eat either fats, proteins, or carbohydrates. And when we eat a fat, let me see here, fat. Okay, let me see. Okay, it's not, oh, there we go, fat. Okay, fat goes in from the intestine into the blood and then slides into our cells. Same with protein. Protein goes right in, okay? But when we eat carbohydrates, which turn into glucose most of the time, then what happens is that glucose is extremely tightly regulated. We cannot have more than a spoonful of sugar in our blood at all times. That's the most. So immediately, an organ called the pancreas kicks in and lets the sugar come into the cells and regulates it like a doorman. Okay, so sugar is very, very tightly regulated by a hormone called insulin, which happens to be a master hormone of all metabolic regulation. So now insulin lets the sugar in. The sugar then is used especially by the muscles, and then it goes into the liver, stored as glycogen, all fine and dandy. There should be glycogen in the liver. But then once we outdo our capacity to store glycogen, once we pass the 100 grams, that's it, of room that we have in the liver, it gets converted into fat and shipped out to the fat cells where it should be, okay? Fat should not be as triglycerides in your blood. Fat should not be in the liver, which is now the epidemic of fatty liver. Fat needs to be inside the fat cells. So how does the fat get into the fat cell? It gets in with the help of insulin. Insulin has many, many roles. One of them is to bring the sugar in. We know it in the world, in the general world. If we use it only for, people think that it's for sugar, bringing down the sugar in the blood, but it's actually a growth hormone and it's a storage hormone. So it stores fat. We cannot store fat without insulin. Okay, that's like type 1 diabetes. No insulin, they get really, really thin. Okay, but but insulin regulates the enzyme that brings the fat in, and the opposite is true. If there's insulin around, I cannot use my fat source to feed myself. So I have to constantly eat. Okay, so insulin must be low between meals and high when I eat. And when I store, and then I use what I eat. So that's healthy. All right, so here, oops, sorry. Let me see. Oh, no, I see what I'm doing wrong. Okay, so you see this is normal. Okay, it goes really low, below 4 between meals. Now, first, we store fat subcutaneously to give us warmth and cushioning. And then when we run out of that space, we start to put it in other places, okay? Abdominal fat is not normal, okay? Even though everybody's walking around with a belly in most of the world, needless to say, United States, here in Spain, it's actually a bit better. Of course, a lot better. But anyway, fat is supposed to be only under the skin. When we start putting it viscerally, it's not good. Okay, this fat gets very, very angry. Okay, this is healthy fat and this is abnormal. This is visceral fat. Okay, it's fat that is inflammatory. It releases cytokines and it changes our constitution. Okay, now what happens is when we have inflammatory fat like this, we get into a state called insulin resistance. It's like the body saying, you know what, I've stored enough. I'm not going to respond anymore to insulin because I am full. But we don't know that, and we keep eating maybe too much carbs. And now I eat that piece of bread. The bread comes in, and what happens is that the pancreas secretes insulin. No response. They're now all the cells are receiving a message. Don't respond. Insulin resistance. But we keep eating, and the pancreas keeps secreting, and you don't have diabetes yet. Why? Because your pancreas is doing a great job. But you have insulin resistance. 88% of Americans have insulin resistance, okay? How do I know? Okay, first of all, you don't, most people don't check their insulin. I'm not talking about glucose, okay, guys? I'm talking about insulin. So insulin now doesn't go down. Remember, I need to store, and then it needs to be very low in order to use. But now I can't use it because that enzyme is inhibited by insulin. So I just store and store and store, and I'm hungry. And even though I'm eating very little, I'm still gaining weight because the insulin is high. And insulin also leads to hunger. Now, what happens is that how does it start to manifest? Well, it manifests through 5 things that we call the metabolic syndrome: weight gain, okay, high triglycerides, low HDL. HDL should be like 60, 70, okay? Hypertension, because insulin causes retention of sodium at the kidney and does many other things, but through many different mechanisms leads to hypertension. We know exactly what causes hypertension. And dysglycemia, because once you don't have enough fat storage space, the fat starts spilling into other things, that's the triglycerides, but also into the pancreas, at which point your pancreas doesn't work well, and therefore you can't keep up with this crazy demand, and the sugar starts going up in the blood. This is very complicated, I understand, but if you get 5% of this, you're gonna be happy about this. So why do I care? I care because these things make you sick. In the end, high insulin is the #1 risk factor for cardiovascular disease, way, way more than any LDL cholesterol, okay? So insulin resistance, okay, it underlies every single chronic disease of our century, okay? It's a very powerful statement what I'm saying here. It's cancer, it's Alzheimer, it's Parkinson's, it's almost every disease. I'm not saying all of it equal. I'm not saying it causes, okay, but it augments and it worsens and it makes it, in some cases, the trigger, okay? So just to give you a tiny example of a study, I'm talking about good quality studies. 600 people followed prospectively for 13 years. When you have a high insulin level, your chances of having a heart attack are much, much higher. And on and on and on and on. And I'm not even, like, guys, the PubMed is crawling with gazillions of studies that show that insulin resistance is the underlying cause. Do doctors check insulin? No, they do not check insulin, okay? So anyway, my idea of a healthy diet is lowering your insulin, okay? Even actually last week, there was a study that showed that telomere length, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the word telomere, is related to longevity, is completely negatively associated with insulin levels, okay? Again, you want to live long, you want long telomeres, okay? So you want low insulin, always, you want low insulin. So basically, when we look at food, of course, if you wanted to really lower insulin, go ahead and don't eat, okay? That's the best way of fasting works because it lowers insulin. And now this is very much in vogue, which is great, but we also need to eat. So how do we do this? So if we eat carbs, it's going to require a ton of insulin. I'm saying the same thing again, but just in a different way. If we eat protein, you're going to see, it's some insulin rise, okay? Protein does, especially in different contexts, it does cause an insulin rise. And then fat causes 0 insulin rise. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about going back to protein and fat, okay? Which is going to give you everything you need because we have a system that provides us all the sugar we need. It's called gluconeogenesis. And this creates as much sugar as you need. We do not need any carbohydrates. It might be a little boring, but we don't need them, okay? So here, there are many other reasons to care besides the insulin. Okay, the protein and fat provide us with nutrients that unfortunately we cannot get elsewhere. Okay, when it's coming from the animal source. So there are many things that are really important. The list is actually longer than this. You can do this in a vegetarian diet, but you have to know what you're doing. It takes a lot of ability to put it right. And animal protein is a complete protein. It has everything it needs. It goes straight in, exactly in the form you need it, and the absorption is fantastic. When we eat plants need to protect themselves. They have a lot of enemies, so they make a lot of anti-nutrients so that you don't that causing a little bit of various impacts in people. But bottom line is that we can do this with plants, but you have to know how to do this. In summary, what I'm suggesting here is that the healthy human diet is basically turning the pyramid upside down. We need a lot of fat, natural fat, okay, fat that we can imagine where it's coming from, not something like canola. Canola, where's the canola source? Okay, sunflower oil made in a factory. We cannot pull out of that seed. Those seed oils go through a very toxic process before they get into our body. So this requires, stepping back and going a bit, let's go a few years back. Now, I treat sick people, so I'm very extreme in my treatment. You don't have to be as extreme as me, but you need to understand the principles to make the right choices. So I really suggest replacing carbs with healthy protein and fat, and the fat should be natural. Now, there are two things I just want to add, which is that the consumption of sugar, okay, sugar in particular, sugar is a combination of glucose and fructose, okay? It's a perfect storm. It's something that leads us to be sick on many different levels because it increases the production of fat to a degree that's causing today the fatty liver that is the epidemic that we find ourselves in today. And also, the other thing I want to warn you about is the seed oils that I just mentioned, okay? These polyunsaturated fats that are made in factories that are today a crucial component of all of our junk food, okay? All of the food that we buy in packaged food in the supermarket contain the combination of the sugar plus the seed oil. And this has been the perfect storm for where we are today. So please avoid the processed foods and know what's in the food, okay? I really encourage the joy of cooking. Go back to making things at home. Go back to knowing what is in your food, okay? So anyway, this is in conclusion. I think a healthy diet is one that keeps insulin levels low, rich in nutrient-dense natural proteins and fat. It minimizes processed foods, and it minimizes sugar, seed oils, and grains. So thank you. Exactly. Yeah.